ask you, can you imagine where you will be when you complete your studies here? When you get to the end of your 4 years here, you will have wanted to have studied in such a way that you'll have good job opportunities before you, or maybe the doors to grad school will open for you. At the end of your time here, you will have wanted to have made some good friends, and some of you are even more ambitious. You want to find your life partner here. But where do you want to be with God? As you get set to launch into a career, where do you want to be in your relationship with Jesus? You know, at a place like Biola with all the academic demands and all the amazing extracurricular opportunities, in the back of your mind, you may be thinking, well, I'll kind of put my relationship with Jesus on hold and pick that up again when I'm done here at Biola and things are less busy. But chances are when you are finished your studies here, you'll be just as busy, if not busier, than you were here. When I finished my undergrad studies, as Barry mentioned, I went to Tokyo, Japan, where I'm from originally, and began to work for the Sony Corporation. And I was what they called a 7-Eleven man. I left my apartment at 7 in the morning and didn't get home until past 11 at night. And then I went to seminary in Boston, came here to plant a church, and then ended up going to Canada to pastor a historic church in the center of Vancouver. And I thought that things might settle down for me in Canada. You know, Canadians are more laid back. But it seemed like there was always some deadline I was facing. There was always a sermon to write, always someone in crisis, and I felt like I was constantly treading water, barely keeping my head above the waterline. You know, I had a rhythm, but that rhythm of life was undermining my relationship with Jesus. And then out of the blue, my mentor, Leighton Ford, an older Presbyterian minister who lives in North Carolina, invited me to join him on a pilgrimage to the holy places of Ireland. And so we go to Ireland and we visit some of the ancient monasteries. And while there, I learned from some of the monks about a rhythm of life, what they call a rule of life, that enables them to experience God as alive and real, not just in their formal times of prayer, but as they're working out in the fields, as they're studying in the library, as they're preparing a meal in the kitchen. They experience God as real and alive in every part of their life. And I was hungry for that kind of friendship with Jesus, where I knew God in my everything. So I returned to Vancouver, and I began to put into practice some of the simple habits I learned from the monks. And these habits changed my life. And so this morning, I want to share about the rhythm of Daniel in the Bible and talk briefly about my own rhythm of life and invite you to consider one for yourself. Now, Daniel is one of the first people in Scripture that we know of that lived by an intentional rhythm. Esther was another person who lived by a rhythm. When her people were facing mass destruction, Esther decided to fast. She lived with this rhythm that enabled her friendship with God to flourish. But let's look at Daniel's rhythm this morning. Daniel, as an adolescent, experienced his homeland of Judah being besieged by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and his army. As a result, his people fell, and Daniel was forced to leave Judah, and he was relocated in Babylon, enrolled in a kind of university as a potential leader in his new land. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are transferred to the University of Tehran. It's not your choice, but you're forced to transfer there. And this is not a Biola in Tehran program, but you're permanently stationed there. You're cut off from your friends here at school, your family, your language, your culture. You're living under a Muslim theocracy, under a supreme leader with absolute powers. How do you feel? Well, if you can imagine some of the fear of that experience, you can imagine something of what Daniel must have felt in Babylon. Because in Babylon, Daniel is cut off from his friends, his family, his language and culture. He's being immersed in a completely pagan view of science and history and philosophy and religion. He's being tutored in subjects like astrology, sorcery, and magic, all of which are considered idolatrous in his original homeland of Israel. He's even given a new name, Belshazzar, a sign that Babylon wants to totally reprogram him. And later in life, the king issues a decree making it a capital offense, a crime punishable by death, to pray to any god except the king. And so when powerful forces are conspiring to pull Daniel off of God, how does Daniel fare? Well, his relationship with God doesn't die. It becomes more alive than ever. In fact, he works with such wisdom. And to quote Barry, he works with such conviction and courage that people look at him and say, there is a man in whom the spirit of the gods must dwell. Now, I don't know what is the greatest compliment you could receive here at Biola would be. Maybe it's that you are brilliant, that being said by one of your professors about you. Or maybe it's that you're an amazing musician, artist, or athlete. Or maybe that you have incredible style. But perhaps the greatest compliment that you could receive would be for someone to point at you and say, the only way I can explain her is by saying the Spirit of the living God must live in her. Or the only way I can explain him is by saying the Spirit of the living God must live in him. So how does Daniel become a person who not only survives in his friendship with God in such a hostile place, but thrives? Well, he doesn't leave it to chance. He has a rhythm. In Daniel 6:10, we read that 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God. And as Daniel returns to his room 3 times a day and kneels in a way that I can't logically explain, it's as though God breathes on him. And he's animated with the very life of God and becomes this embodiment of God's wisdom and courage and love and power in the world. And people who live lives of such beauty and mystery that the only explanation for them is that the living, loving God lives inside them, have a rhythm of life. Daniel's was simple. It was to pray 3 times a day. Our rhythm may be as simple as setting the chime on our watch so that we are reminded on the hour to briefly pause and remember God. People who live lives of such beauty and mystery that the only explanation for their lives is the presence of a living, loving God have what the ancient monastics described as a rule of life. Now, don't let the word rule scare you. I know it sounds harsh. But the way the monks in places like Ireland are using the word rule is by drawing on its original root meaning, which means trellis. And if you've been to the Napa Valley or a vineyard somewhere, you know that a trellis is simply a support structure that enables a grapevine to experience more sunlight, to be pruned and guided in its growth so that it can become more fruitful. And a rhythm or rule of life is simply a support structure that we have that enables us to be more exposed to the sunlight of Jesus, so to speak, so we can be pruned and guided in our growth, so that we produce more of the fruit of Jesus in our life, more of his love, joy, and peace. And I don't know about you, but I need and desperately want those things in my life. Let me be clear. The process of our bearing fruit is something that God does. Jesus said in John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So the process of our bearing fruit is God's work. But you and I play a role in the process. That's why the Apostle Paul said, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because God is at work within you, both to will and to do according to his good pleasure. So Paul is saying in this text, God is at work within you by his Spirit, changing your desires so that you want to do stuff, live in such a way that brings God pleasure and do you good. And so just go with it. Just go with what God is already doing in you. And one of the ways we can go with what God is doing in us is to create a simple rhythm, a trellis that supports our friendship with God that we were just singing about. Now, building a trellis or having a rhythm of life shouldn't feel like just another thing to do, like an ought to, but more like a get to, more like a gift. You know, one of my favorite things to do is to sail. You know, I live in Vancouver, also, you know, on the coast, and it doesn't feel like an ought to, but a get to. The other day, someone dropped by my office, and he didn't have, we didn't have a time arranged to meet, but he just kind of dropped in, and he said, Ken, I'm in the process of organizing this fundraiser for a Christian camp here in British Columbia. We've secured these fine wines that we're going to auction off, and we thought it would be a great idea to also auction off a sailing trip with you on our, not my, but his family yacht. And he's kind of apologizing to me, saying, you know, I know that you're really busy, and I hate to oblige you here, but it's for a really good cause. Would you consider doing this? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? I don't really care about the fundraiser. But I'd love to go sailing and to be part of this, because for me, when I am sailing, and here's what it looks like to sail in BC, and I'm experiencing this sunlight and the fresh wind, it just is life-giving for me. And so it is with my trellis, my simple rhythm of life. It's not this thing that I feel like I ought to do, but something that exposes me to the sunlight of God, the fresh wind, so that I experience more of God, more of the fruit of love, joy, and peace in my life. So it is truly a gift for me. Let me describe briefly my own simple rhythm. Part of it includes Sabbath, and I know you have a Sabbath day coming up on Saturday. I tend to be a workaholic by nature. I'm not sure if it's because I'm from Japan, from Asia originally, or if it's just my personality. But one of the most helpful things about my rhythm is having this 24-hour Sabbath, honoring the fourth of the 10 Commandments, where I unplug, stop working, don't do anything related to work. It's a day to pray and a day to play. And I know that honoring the Sabbath as a student can be both a gift and a challenge, because you're thinking, I ought to be studying, if you've got an exam coming up. And so you've got to plan some, but it's also a great opportunity to trust God with your studies. And here's what I have found, both as a student and someone who's now working. When I honor the Sabbath, I work from a place of rest rather than desperately needing to rest from work. Can you hear the difference? I mean, they sound very similar, but there is a difference between working from a place of rest and desperately needing to rest from work. And the former is a much better way to live. And so Sabbath is part of my rhythm. Another part of my rhythm, my trellis, is exercise. For me, it feels like a gift. This morning, I had a little workout where I'm staying. Typically in the morning, I will either run, swim, or go for a bike ride. And again, every rhythm is going to look different. I'm not trying to impose this on you, but for me, it helps me connect with God. Dr. James Proshaka, a researcher at the University of Rhode Island, has pointed out that exercise for many people is a kind of, quote, keystone habit that triggers change in other areas of people's lives. People who exercise regularly tend to make more healthy eating choices. They tend to be more focused in their work. And they also tend to be less stressed out and more patient. And for some reason, people who exercise regularly use their credit cards less. I know the researchers don't know why. Maybe it's because people are just too tired to go shopping. But for me, Sabbath and exercise are part of my rhythm. And then a third practice is meditation. I tend to be a very easily distracted person. At any given time, I can feel like there are 1,000 chimpanzees jumping around in my mind. And so at some point in the morning, see, I'm kind of distracted even now. I'm looking for a chair. I will sit somewhere. Hope it's okay, Terry, if I use this for a moment. And for a brief time, maybe it's like 10 minutes, I'll just breathe deeply. And I'm so easily distracted that I use a simple word like wait that I repeat. Wait, as in wait on God, or Jesus. Jesus. I set the timer on my watch so I'm not thinking about the time. And when I'm done, I stand up and I feel more relaxed. And throughout the day, a little bit more focused and a little bit more conscious of Jesus. Now, I know that some of you here probably think that meditation is just a weird waste of time. But Dr. Kelly McGonigal, a psychologist who teaches at Stanford, points out that if you meditate for just, say, 10 minutes over between 2 and 3 weeks, you will show signs of greater attention and self-control. And she points out that if you meditate for about 10 minutes between 2 and 3 months, if we were to do an MR scan on your brain, we would see that the neural networks in your brain associated with focus and controlling your impulses have actually grown. We would also notice that the gray matter in your brain associated with anxiety, stress, and depression has actually shrunk. There's this guy named Andrew who, like me, is very easily distracted. He's an engineer. And he was experimenting with meditation, and he thought, I really suck at meditation. I'm such a loser at meditation because when I try and do it, other thoughts leak in. He was about to give up, and then he thought for a moment and said to himself, well, when I meditate, even if it's just for 10 minutes on those days, and he was trying to be more conscious of his diet, when I'm standing in line at the cafeteria and I'm wanting to order something deep fried and salty, on the days I meditated, I hear a kind of whistle. And I make a healthier food choice. Andrew thought to himself, on the days I meditate, even if it's just like for 10 minutes, and there's something really sarcastic about to drip off the edge of my tongue, I'm more likely to bite my tongue. And he thought, on the days I meditated, even if it was just for a brief time, when I was distracted at work, which is a lot, I'm more easily able to refocus on my work. Now you may say, well, that's kind of superficial. Food choices, how we talk to other people, how we work, how we study. But if the goal is God in our everything, then our eating choices, how we talk to each other, and how we focus while we're studying really, really matter. As Barry mentioned, I recently wrote a book called God in My Everything. And in that book, there is this graph, this trellis that describes and names certain spiritual practices, like, for example, Sabbath, which just talked about, and the gift of a 24-hour period of rest. A prayer, God is with us all the time, but we're often not aware of it. A simple rhythm can make us more conscious of God. Spiritual friendship and how that can change our life. I write about sexuality in one chapter. The word is small. I did not design this graph. But sexuality is a big part of our lives, and I write about how we can channel our sexual or our erotic energy in ways that honor God. I describe that from some of my own experience and how we can use our sexual energy to foster creativity in ourselves and in others. I write about play. A lot of people don't find chapters in books on spiritual practices that address play. But is there something you do that really brings you life? For me, it's physical activity, being outdoors. For you, it might be hearing a siren and you start to pray. Or it might be listening to beautiful music, or viewing amazing art, or spending time with special friends, or or eating great food. Parker Palmer has said, self-care is never a selfish act. It is the stewardship of the only gift you have to offer the world. And justice. A rule of life, a rhythm of life, a trellis isn't just about us and God and us, but it's something that enables us to become more alive with the life of Jesus, that we go out into the world and make it a more just and compassionate place with his help. So as you think about a potential rhythm, start simply, maybe with a practice that connects you with God, maybe another one that nourishes you, and perhaps a third one that connects you with people in relationship or in service. The goal of the rule of life or the rhythm of life is not to build a beautiful trellis. I think this is pretty beautiful. Someone else made it. But the goal is not to become some superstar when it comes to spiritual disciplines. The goal is to simply have something that supports our friendship with Jesus so that we experience more of his Son and more of his fresh wind, so that we bear more of the fruit of his love, joy, peace in our lives. If you create a rhythm, a trellis, and it starts feeling like this, oh, so heavy. Oh, you're killing me. It's probably a self-created rule, not a spirit-created rule. If you think about it, you're going to have some kind of rhythm in your life, whether by default or design. You will have a rhythm that will either sabotage or support your friendship with Jesus. So why not pick a rhythm that will support your friendship with Jesus? Because you'll have a rhythm one way or another that will sabotage or support that relationship. And if you'd like that, it may be helpful to drop by the book table. I'll be there afterwards. I'm glad to say hi and maybe pick up a copy of God in My Everything. My wife, a couple of times, has looked at me and said, Ken, you are the happiest pastor I know. My wife doesn't know that many pastors. But to the extent that I experience joy in my life, it's not because there is an absence of crisis or drama. I'm a pastor. I'm dealing with people in crises all the time. But to the extent that I experience joy, it's partly because I have a great family and some terrific friends, but it's largely because I have this trellis, this simple rhythm that supports my friendship with Jesus. And my hope and my prayer for you here at Biola is that you would know the joy that comes not from the absence of pain and adversity, because sometimes pain and adversity can open us up to the life of God like nothing else can. But my hope and prayer for you is that you would know the joy that comes from the very real and alive presence of Jesus Christ. My hope and prayer for you here at Biola is that you would know God's presence is alive and real, not only in your times of formal prayer and as you gather for chapel, but you would know God's presence is alive and real as you study, as you do music and sports, as you hang out with your friends, and as you move out into the world, making it a more just place. My hope and prayer for you is that, like Daniel and like Esther, you would know God in your everything. May it be so in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.